It's been described as the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. And today the Prime Minister will apologise to the tens of thousands of people given infected blood between the 1970s and 1991, and the families whose lives have been utterly devastated. And
we're joined now by three of the many people who have suffered because of this scandal. Lauren Palmer became an orphan aged only 9 years old after both her mum, Barbara, and her dad, Stephen, died 8 days apart after becoming infected with HIV and hepatitis C from contaminated blood that her father received.
Jason Evans, who says that he can't remember a time before the blood scandal. His first memories of his dad, Jonathan, were of him dying from AIDS, and that was back in 1993, when he was just 4 years old. And former Olympic swimmer Sharron Davies joins us now from Bath as well, because her mother, Sheila, died of hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood during a gallbladder operation. Good morning to you, Sharron. Thanks for joining us today. When did your mother find out that the blood that she'd been given, which she thought had saved her life, was in fact fatally infected?
Yeah, so she had this gallbladder operation in the 70s. As you can remember, in the 70s, I was deep in my training, so I don't have that many memories of this operation apart from going into the hospital and seeing her there. And then because hepatitis C is the silent killer, you know, you'd often don't know that you had it for a long time until it really starts to affect you. And that's what happened to my mum. So it was about the 90s before she was then diagnosed with it. And then she had a 20-year battle before she died. And she had a great specialist who seemed to really keep it under control for quite a long time. And then he sadly left and went to Australia. And from that moment, she really went downhill quite quickly. And it's that battle, it's the drugs that you're also being given, which have a massive effect on your life. And this was a woman who didn't smoke, she didn't drink. You know, she worked for the MOD until she was 70. She hardly left Plymouth. She lived a very reserved life. And she kept very quiet about it. And I know she was worried about passing it on, you know, to the rest of the family. So that was an emotional turmoil that's there as well. Compared to your two other guests in the studio, you know, it's not the same. I mean, the hepatitis C was absolutely horrendous, but the haemophiliacs that were given HIV and the effect on them, the loss from their families at a very early age. And of course, in the 70s and the 80s, you know, the way that people were treated with HIV was something very different to the way people are treated today. But it's the fact that this scandal's been kicked down the road for so many years. I mean, my mum died in 2017, just as this report was started. And that is, you know, that's 7 years ago. And it's taken 7 years to get any form of transparency. And this is the scandal with this. You know, the biggest scandal is the cover-ups. And this is what the government has to apologise for, but has to be 100% transparent about what went on and why this was covered up for so long. When
your mother was diagnosed with hepatitis C, did she know in that moment that she'd contracted it from the transfusion, or was it further down the road that the penny dropped?
No, I think it was the fact that she couldn't have got it from anywhere else, you know, and it was coddled. I mean, the whole thing was just not properly managed. So I think, yes, she was aware, you know, that's where she actually got it from. I mean, I'm trying very hard to get all of her medical record. And that's another challenge right now for anybody that is trying to get all of this information together, is trying to get the National Health Service to help the people, you know, to give them the records, to give them the information, because that's also something that needs to be enforced by the government. They're going to assist those families into making sure that they've got all the evidence that they need to be able to present their cases. But this is about getting help for people right now that are dying. For me, it wasn't really so much about my mum, because sadly, I can't bring my mum back. It's lovely to be able to talk about her, but I can't bring her back. But there are 2 people a week dying at the moment, and many of those in abject poverty because of what's happened to them. And we must help those people right now.
Jason, you were 4 when your father died back in 1993, and he suffered with haemophilia. So he was given this product called Factor 8, which clotted the blood. And
that's right.
That was manufactured using infected plasma, wasn't it? Now, that happened in 1993. He, as a result of receiving this contaminated Factor 8, was diagnosed with HIV, hepatitis C. What impact did that have on your family? Because as Sharron reminds us, there was a huge stigma around HIV at that time, back in the early 90s.
Well, you're right. For blood transfusions at the time, like what happened with Sharron's mother, the underlying risk was between 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 in the general population. But with that factor VIII blood product, where it's mixing together tens of thousands of plasma donations, every single bottle of factor VIII was infected with hepatitis. It was 100% infected, and around a third for HIV. So when my dad was diagnosed in 1985, it blew their relationship apart. They'd only been married for around a year. Yeah. And the terrible stigma. My mum was sacked from her job from a local bakery. The owner was very forthright in saying that he believed she posed a risk to staff and customers. And that was, he actually was quite proud of that, felt like he had done the right thing. So this was the attitude.
Because people were terrified, absolutely terrified, weren't they? It wasn't just the stigma, they were genuinely terrified of contracting it.
What about you? What happened to you?
Well, I mean, that stigma persisted through the 90s. And, you know, at school I was called the AIDS boy, and it was just this constant cloud over my entire life, and is the reason why I set up the Factor VIII campaign group, ultimately.
It's kind of defined your life, hasn't it? I mean, you know, you have been living with this since your earliest memories, and your earliest memories of your dad are the funeral.
That's right. I mean, I can remember seeing my dad on his deathbed. I can remember the funeral and seeing all my family crying. And, you know, it's, for me, this whole campaign, for the personal side of it for me, has been about trying to honour his memory and his legacy as best I can, because despite everything that had happened to him, he still did the best he could to be a father. And as terrible, obviously, as this has been for me personally and for my family, I do think of myself as somewhat lucky compared to Lauren's situation.
And just very quickly, before we talk to Lauren, is it Vindication Day today? Is this the day you've been waiting for?
I really think it is. I've attended almost every single hearing of that inquiry over the last 5 or 6 years it's been running. I've been very much involved in reading the witness statements, submitting questions. And after everything I've seen the inquiry team has done, that Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair, has done, I'm very confident that today is the day, and today has to be the day, because there's not going to be another chance.
You and Lauren go straight from here to the inquiry to be privately briefed on the results before they're released publicly. And Lauren, you lost both your mum and dad within a couple of days of each other, just over a week between losing both. And you were just 9, weren't you, when that happened? How has it affected your family, and what would justice look like? Would it be a compensation payment? Would it be Rishi Sunak saying sorry? Or would it be prosecutions, pharmaceutical companies being sued? What does that look like for you?
I mean, as regards to how it impacted me and my family, it's just completely torn us apart. And it's the ripple effect that it's had on up until this day. It doesn't just end at my parents' death. It was everything else surrounding that. So there was lack of support. Growing up, had to go without a lot of things.
Who looked after you? Who looked after you after both of your parents died so soon after the other?
I went to live with my mother's side of my family. Fortunately, moved away from the area that I was living in, so that helped a little bit with sort of the stigma side of things. But it just, yeah, I mean, I haven't got a house, I didn't go to uni, I've literally just finished a university degree now. There was a lot of things that I held back on. But the hardest part was being separated from my half-brothers. So I literally was, my family just completely...
What happened to them?
So they went to live with their biological father.
I see.
So from my mother's first marriage. And that was, it just was completely heartbreaking. Every time I used to see them and visit them and having to come away from them, it was just grief again. And it just, yeah, it was a really, really difficult upbringing. But
yeah,
everything that you mentioned about
Compensation, apology.
Apology, accountability. If people can be prosecuted, then yes, absolutely.
Sharron, I know that you are, you're very mindful that your experience is different because you had decades with your mum, didn't you? It's a different scenario. Whereas for Lauren, and I know it's really affected you, hasn't it, listening to Jason and Lauren speaking this morning?
The dignity of your two studio guests is just extraordinary. Because, I had my mum until she was 78, even though it was 20 years, which was quite difficult. And she had broken bones and all sorts of things that came from the drugs that she was given. But I had her. These two wonderful people didn't have their parents. And this was ignored, and other countries managed to get convictions against drug companies. We're the last in the world to actually sort this problem out. And this is happening, scandal after scandal, and it must stop. We have to start dealing with our mistakes, face them, and look after people that are the victims.
Jason, I wonder if I can, because you've run this campaign really in your father's name, Factor 8. Just establish for our viewers, when did people who could have changed what was happening know what was happening?
A lot earlier than we previously thought.
The screening began in 1991, is that right? But the products had been available from the 70s.
The old narrative of this story, the cover-up narrative, was that in the 70s there's this new product for haemophiliacs, and slowly we learn about the risks, but before anything is done, it's too late and everyone's infected. The real narrative now, from the inquiry evidence, is that in the 1940s, there was another plasma product called albumin, which was heated. And that's important because heat kills hepatitis and HIV, and that product was heated specifically to kill hepatitis. Fast forward decades, 1970s, that process, that pasteurisation, never happened with Factor 8. The evidence suggests because the manufacturers just didn't want to put the money in to do it. And the second big thing is...
That is malpractice.
Well, that's negligence, isn't it?
And perhaps worse is that we've talked about the mixing together of the plasma donations that made it so deadly. In 1953, so again, decades earlier, the World Health Organization warned all member states plasma products should be made from no more than 10 donations because of the risk of hepatitis. Yet, 1970s, tens of thousands, no heating. All of that knowledge was there decades earlier. And if those two things had been done, in fact, if only the heat had been done, no one would have been infected with hepatitis.
So this was a disaster unfolding in plain sight?
Yes.
Absolutely.
If somebody watching today has had a transfusion, I don't know when did Factor 8 stop being used for haemophilia?
Well, the unheated product was phased out from around mid-85.
OK. So anybody affected, blood transfusion or Factor 8, who may not have been tested for hepatitis C or HIV, perhaps, what is the advice to them this morning?
Well, the NHS does now offer free hepatitis C testing, and in fact, people can go to the NHS website online and order a free hepatitis C test that will be posted to them. It's a finger prick test that they can then return back and get the results back.
All right, well, I mean, first of all, we're just so pleased for you that this day has finally come, and just to offer you the most belated of condolences on your terrible loss.
Thank you.
Just terrible. Thank you both very much for coming in today. As you say, you're going straight off now to the inquiry.
And Sharron, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Sharron.
We'll wait to see whether Rishi Sunak... We are expecting an apology today, but we're also expecting a compensation bill. The government told us this was an appalling tragedy that never should have happened. We're clear that justice needs to be done and swiftly. This includes establishing a new body to deliver an infected blood compensation scheme. And if you've been affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, you can find advice and support at itv.com/helplines.